Gabby, and I'm the event manager here at the Freelancer Club. And I'm a little nervous tonight because I'll be joined by three fantastic speakers who are going to share their insights and point of view on AI, which is the main topic of tonight, as you know. The title of tonight is The Rise of AI. And the question is whether freelancers can stay competitive in an automated world. We have three wonderful speakers who I'm going to introduce in just a second. But before I share more info on them with you, I would like to ask you to share a bit of your profile. What is it that you do, and whether you've come across AI or not before. That would be very handy. Just drop it in the chat in the same way as you would any questions, and there'll be space to have the answers at the end. We've already spoken to our members, who we have more than 52,000 of, and they've mentioned that, for example, copywriters and editors are using AI for research. AI is also used in production, so there's very interesting ways how people have been using it already. So please open the chat window now, share who you are, your Freelancer Club profile, your profession, and if you have any either questions or experience with AI, we want to know. So thank you so much once again. That's all from me. I'll be moderating tonight's session. So as I said, any questions, just pop them in the chat. And let me go and introduce the three speakers of tonight. If I can just call out your name, and if you could tell us a little bit more about what is it that you do, that would be great. So can we please start with Charlie Hunt? Charlie, welcome. And please share a bit more about what is it that you do.
Thanks, Gabby. So I'm Charlie Hunt. I'm the founder of Proof Content. We specialize in key messaging, website rewrites, and blog content strategies. And we've used the AI from about 2.5 years ago. So I guess it seems like a very different landscape in just 2.5 years, which is very interesting. But yeah, hopefully I'll be able to share some insights into how we use it and how the world's changing.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Next up is Alex Wellham. Alex, can you tell us a bit more about you, please?
Good afternoon, everyone. So my name's Alex. I'm a solicitor with Britha Solicitors. We specialise in intellectual property. So I'll be looking to talk to you a little bit more about the legal side of AI and how that's developed and how the situation and position is currently. And I'm looking forward to speaking to you all over the next hour.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alex. And last but definitely not least, Matt Dowling from the Freelancer Club.
Thanks, Gabby. Yeah, hi, it's Matt Dowling here. So I think tonight I'll be taking the role of freelance representative. We've also been using AI for about 1.5 years, nearly 2 years, in various different guises. And we're also seeing how freelancers are using it from interactions with them. So hopefully I'll be able to give some perspective from a startup perspective, but also from a freelance perspective as well.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for your introductions. And just a reminder, don't be shy to introduce yourself in the chat here as well. Thank you. And so let's dive right in. My first question for our speakers would be, how is AI currently affecting freelancers?
Thanks, Gabby. Perhaps I'll kind of kick this bit off, and I can give you just a brief perspective from a startup's point of view. We engage with many freelancers, as you can imagine. We're a distributed company. That means our whole team are freelance and they work remotely, but we also connect multiple freelancers with clients on a daily basis. So what we're seeing a lot at the moment is direct use from certain professions like writers, marketeers, social media folk, and I'll leave a lot of that to Charlie to speak on, but also individuals utilizing particularly ChatGPT for inspiration and some removal of admin within their day-to-day. But I think Charlie would probably have a better insight in terms of those practical uses for AI as a service.
So I think, yeah, from our side, AI, I guess, is nowhere near kind of stealing freelancer jobs, but I think a freelancer using AI could steal someone's job. So I think it's about kind of putting aside the ego of kind of it being AI and just using them as the best tools they can be to create the best possible content you can for your clients. So the ways we've used it is we had a startup affiliate site, and they had, I think, 6,000 retailers, but obviously as they were a startup, they didn't have a huge amount of budget for content. So we just used AI to create a lot, like 6,000 merchant pages for them, which was very easy because obviously those retailers have lots of information about them on the internet. And then we've got some basic content there. From there, we can kind of see what's performing well and where do we need to put actual human content. So I guess that's one use. For me personally, I really hate starting with a blank page. So I find AI really, really useful in kind of just giving you an outline. So the tools I use for that are Jasper, Copysmiths, and then also GPT Chat is probably the one I use the most now. But that one does take a while to get used to the prompts, and it can't write in different tones of voice. So probably if you're new to it, then Jasper's the kind of the one to use. I'm also experimenting with a repurposing AI tool. I haven't had any conclusive evidence of whether it's good or not good. Sorry, I hope to bring that to the meeting, but maybe I can send Matt a quick paragraph to send out if it is really good.
And I'll just chime in here then from sort of more of a legal commercial point of view. Look, from a legal perspective, it's a very grey area right now. I mean, AI has been around for quite some time, but it only feels like in the last few years where it's really beginning to explode. And it's one of those things now where now the genie's out the lamp, it's not going away. It's only going to grow and get bigger and bigger. I'll briefly just cover quickly what the current positions are regarding sort of IP created by AIs in the UK and IP created by AIs in the US in USA for us to try and cover both sort of jurisdictions. But essentially the two countries have taken very different positions. In the UK, AI generated work the ownership of computer generated work lies with the person who has made the arrangements necessary to create the work. So for example, if I'm instructing AI like ChatGPT with a question, so for example, how is AI going to affect freelancers, and the answer that it produces, the copyright, I will own the copyright in those works as a literal piece of word. However, in America, they don't allow any computer generated work to own intellectual property. So there's sort of two ways in which that can go down. The first is that any work generated will just automatically enter the public domain and everybody is free to use it. Or secondly, and this is where things get a bit more difficult, is it can potentially be deemed what's called a derivative piece of work if the AI tool was exposed to, say, a certain image whilst it was creating a new image. And then the problem is finding out, well, what other images was that AI machine fed? What other information was it fed? What has it used to create the answers that it's got? And this is the problem that we're seeing at the moment. From a commercial sort of side of things, very quick, I mean, there are positive and negative effects to freelancers on it. So there's both sides of things. From a positive perspective, like AI can automate routine tasks, making it easier for freelancers to focus on more high value work. It can help freelancers find new clients, manage their projects, and improve on their productivity. But the obvious negative side effect of this is that it can compete with freelancers by performing certain tasks more efficiently and well, I say at a lower cost, but it's essentially free. This can result in reduced demand for certain types of freelancers' work, leading to lower prices or fewer opportunities. But I think the overall impact will really depend on the specific skills and services that freelancers are offering, as well as their ability to adapt to the new technology and the change in any sort of market conditions. But yeah, so that's where I'm at with that at the moment.
Wonderful.
If I could just jump in, Gabby, before you move it on. One thing that I think is relevant to tag on to that is when speaking to freelancers in the lead up to this session, we got questions from image makers, so folks in photography, videography, design, saying, you know, we're not going to see much of an impact, but rather we're talking about writers and marketeers. But I think that's the wrong way to address this. You know, this is impacting everybody, and we're starting to see slow digital fingerprints all over the way we're using it as companies and freelancers are using it. So I think right now we all need to be aware of its limitations. We'll touch on those, how freelancers are using it, but also how companies are going to harness this this new tool. And like any tool, it's going to be around how do you harness it, how do you use it, and when and where do you use it. But I think we might get onto that in a bit.
Just to add to that as well, for the images on our blog, for example, I looked high and low, I looked at design agencies, and I didn't like anything that anyone was doing with their imagery on their blog. And I just felt I was seeing the same stock images all the time. So we've actually started using AI to create very simple kind of line illustrations for each blog post. So actually, I think it is probably, you know, because we just don't have the budget for, you know, we're uploading 6 blog posts a month. We don't have the budget to create beautiful imagery every time. So I think it is kind of impacting everybody, really.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I would like to build up on that as well, whilst also the audience is sharing how or what they would like to learn about AI. We have Sarah who works with stock media, and she would like to know how it will impact that. So basically similar to what you've just been talking about, Charlie. And before that, you also mentioned ChatGPT and how that can be used. We have an article writer and content creator who, again, will definitely incorporate this into their practice, or could. So maybe, Charlie, could you elaborate a little bit more on how freelancers can actually harness AI in their practice?
Yeah, so I guess the main thing is to kind of speed up what you're doing now. I think with ChatGPT, it depends on the topic. So we work for a law tech company at the moment, and the articles take about 3 days to write and research and edit. We've looked at trying to speed that up with AI, but the research is so rubbish that it takes us longer to kind of go through and fact check it than it does to actually edit it. So for me at the moment, it's more about ideation and kind of looking at what everybody else is doing and seeing how you can kind of build on that. I think, I think where you've got, you know, where you might hire a freelancer from Fiverr who's charging like, I don't know, 50 quid a blog post, I think that level of writing will be taken over by AI, especially while Google can't tell the difference at the moment. But I think if you're learning from every blog post you're doing, that's not going to be a threat. In terms of kind of how else you can use it, I think where we do key messaging is quite helpful, because there are like, you know, there are a certain amount of ways that people have already said everything there is to say. So kind of having something that thinks very differently from a human to kind of rejig sentences where you've got a few ideas for what you might want to say is actually really, really helpful, because it just gives you that outsider's perspective, I guess. So things like that. And then I know there are lots of SEO tools you can use, and there's lots of kind of free that I can't remember what the website's called. I think it might be called Made with GPT-3, but there's a whole host of stuff on that website that will kind of help you with all the automated stuff like keyword research and things like that. And obviously it needs a human eye to kind of have a look over it. But I think just getting rid of those dull jobs so you can do the actual creative work that you want to do is such a brilliant way to use AI. And I don't know what the future looks like, but I think for now, it is such a lovely way to get rid of all those boring jobs that you don't want to do.
Charlie, do you think like we're going to see the death of content as it used to be in relation to SEO? I mean, if ChatGPT, for instance, can create this in the background and start rattling evergreen content off for everybody's blog, does that then dilute content and organic clicks over time?
I think, well, I guess there are two sides of it. So there's the one side, which is, yeah, GPT is going to write all this rubbish that is already kind of being produced, that doesn't have its own spin and isn't really thoroughly researched and doesn't include kind of internal research from companies. So when we work with companies, we have a really clear process to kind of harness their internal knowledge before we write anything. And I think that's a really important way to kind of stay ahead of AI. I think the other side of it is that I don't like using GPT chat to search for things, because it takes away the illusion of choice that Google gives me. Now, I know that Google heavily creates its newsfeed, but I feel like I have a choice of which link to click on. whereas GPT is just kind of gathering everything and giving me just one kind of source of information, which I find very interesting. I don't think a lot of like kids at school are struggling with that because they're not kind of, they're using it just as when they would come to use Google as well. So I think that one will be really interesting, and I don't know how I feel about that one, and I don't know how we address that because it is so inaccurate.
Yeah, just anecdotally, so I punched in a couple of tests around where to source freelance jobs, and I have noticed that ChatGPT will list and link to popular sites. So if it's pulling from Google, for instance, and it's going to start to draw in what it believes to be the top few searches, how companies start to get onto that list, ChatGPT's recommended list, then switches how companies, individuals, freelancers need to think about SEO and organic search. Equally, I think with Bing's introduction, Microsoft and Bing bringing ChatGPT into play, that in theory will start to reduce the amount of clicks through to individual websites. So I think any freelancers who are currently generating leads and inquiries from organic click-throughs probably need to start thinking about how ChatGPT and how Bing might influence that in the future, and whether there's ways in which you can get your site listed. And that's something I don't think we yet know about. So
I think it's probably similar to how you write for voice search, because there is just one result that comes up, and it's obviously a different way of writing and speaking. I think also 65% of Google searches result in no clicks anyway. So we're already seeing a world where we're needing to write for snippets and things like that. So, and other parts of the search results page. So yeah, I think we were probably going that way anyway, but you're right, there's definitely a lot to think about with that one.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing. I would like to maybe bring it back to Matt for a second again. We're talking a lot about written word and text and content, but on the Freelancer Club we gather creatives from all different industries there, or from creative industries, but different fields. They're photographers, they're videographers, they're art directors, etc. So maybe Matt, if you could tell us a bit more about how these professionals can also utilize AI in their practice to help them maybe make it more efficient, as Charlie was saying, not to waste your time on the dull tasks, but also to kind of elevate their practice, take it to the next step.
So what we're seeing at the moment, there's probably two main areas to focus on. One is the inspiration side. So if you're having a kind of blank moment, well, then you can dip into AI and ask it to suggest ideas. Again, I think that has heavy limitations over a period of time. But if you're clever with your command and you can start to utilize certain ideas just to spark that initial idea and then take it where you want to take it, it could act as a source of inspiration. But if you start to research more around AI image generators or AI logo designers, we're starting to see an absolute boom in image creation, video creation, design creation. And I think there's a kind of pro and con, and I'm really keen to get Alex's take on this, because if you start using AI to create content that you then use or sell to a client, it starts to bring in implications. And maybe Alex, you're far better positioned to speak on what the potential risks are there.
Yeah, it sort of goes back to where you are in the world, but I'll concentrate from a UK perspective. So I think that's more relevant. So in the UK, as I said before, if you are the user who inputs the question or puts in the query to the AI machine, whatever it spits out is you are going to own now, according to the UK law as at the moment. That causes some problems, because if it produces something that infringes a third party's copyright, if it produces something that is potentially illegal, we have seen, for example, deep fake celebrities being used in deep fake videos. These are now part of new statutory laws, which goes into sort of revenge porn and the rest of that kind of thing. And if you own this video, all of a sudden you own something against the law, and if you share it, you could be breaking the law. As a freelancer, if you are obtaining content through an AI, I think, as Charlie says, you've got to do your own checks and balances to ensure that what it's produced is A, is correct, and B, isn't going to infringe on anything else that's out there. Because if you don't, if you just pawn it off to the end client without doing those checks and balances, then ultimately you are going to be responsible for the fallout of that. And it's not just going to be against the potential third party alleging the infringement, but if you've got a contract in place with the end client, and you've provided indemnities to say that, you know, this content is going to be of your own making, of your own design, and, you know, the intellectual property is going to be okay, then you could be in breach of contract. So there's it. I mean, I personally think AI, as my own use at the moment, I think it's really, really good for the inspirational side of things. You say, when you've got a bit of a block and it can just throw out 400 or 500 words, or throw out an image, and you can sort of go, oh, okay, yeah, I can sort of see that element there, or I can that sort of give me an idea and get me back on track. To use it solely as to generate content which you are essentially going to pawn off as your own and just push it out there without any sort of checks and balances in place, I think puts you in a very risky legal situation.
We saw that with Google's attempt to rival ChatGPT and
yeah,
losing whatever it was.
Yeah.
And Sports Illustrated as well have had a really big scandal for giving out wrong medical information from ChatGPT. So be interesting to see how they come back from that.
There is a point here on the limitations of AI at the moment. So there's the factual inaccuracies that, as Alex was saying, are just so key as a freelancer. Whatever you put out there, particularly if you're putting it out as a service and you're getting paid for it, it's like everything else. You got to check it and reference it, or else, you know, you're going to go down a rocky road. But I've also noticed from using it for a while, there are patterns emerging, particularly with the written content that I'm seeing. I'm not as au fait with the image generation content to be able to spot that. And I think it's much more to do with the specific commands that you give it. But with the written content, that pattern, for me now personally, having seen so much of it, is recognizable. And I think there's a danger that we're just going to start to rely on this as a means of written content, no matter how you do it. It doesn't have to be as a service. It might be to produce blog content for your site, but that then is starting to look very repetitious.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing on that, I just want to bring up the AI detector software tools that are out there, originally designed for teachers and schools to help them spot any students who are using AI to present essays or written content, are now getting used by a lot of startups and companies. So if I want to run something through these tools, it'll detect and tell me if it's being written by an AI. I've tested about 4 of them, and ChatGPT tricked all of them. It got through every one of them without getting recognized. Only Grammarly's AI checker flagged something, and I think that was probably because it wanted me to sign up and upgrade my account. So that will catch up with technology, no doubt. But another thing to keep an eye on one side, we're going to have folks hacking the AI system to try and make it more and more believable, which is the advancement of the technology. And on the other side, we're going to have folks trying to prevent and safeguard it. And I think that battle is going to rumble on ad nauseum.
All right, thank you. Maybe if we can go a little back to what also Alex was mentioning in terms of the IP protection, your intellectual property. We talk about how we can use AI in our advantage as freelancers. What about the content that's being used and generated through AI? So being on the other end of the spectrum, is there a way, Alex, and if you can maybe compare, contrast UK and US case, how the people whose work is actually being used can be protected? Yeah,
so I mean, I mean, to protect your current work at the moment from use in AI, I mean that there are legal mechanisms that you can use, but ultimately none of these are going to physically stop your work from being, if it's on the internet, then an AI is at some point going to capture it. One of them out there is going to capture it. The important point is to have certain mechanisms in place where you can register as much of your intellectual property as you can, so that you have got potential remedies for when it has been used in a way that you're not happy with. So there's no one size sort of fits all solution to this, but a few that I thought about are, so registering intellectual property whenever you've created a new invention. So if you're looking down, trying to obtain a patent for it, if you've got a new design software, looking at registering the design, or if you've got a trademark, obviously registering the trademark. Now, copyright is a little bit different in the sense that it's an automatic unregistered right. There are very few countries where you can obtain a copyright recordal, because they just don't register these. I mean, America is different. You can register copyright in America. You don't have to. It is still an automatic right, but you can register copyright in America, and same is correct for China as well. But what they would do then is that essentially they gives you a date as to when that copyright existed as like an originating date for when it was. So if you needed to prove earlier rights, for example, but sort of going off the side a little bit. For other ways, legal agreements, I think, will become really important for freelancers. So using legal agreements, NDAs, contracts, website terms of use policies, freelancer agreements to protect your IP. And you can specify within these agreements and these policies, you know, who has access to it, how it can be used, and more importantly, if you want, to expressly state that, you know, the use of your work is not to be uploaded into any artificial intelligence algorithm or machine. And although, again, although it doesn't physically prevent it from occurring, you know that if you've created a piece of work for somebody and that piece of work ends up being used within an AI generator, then you can go back to that end client and say, look, there's a problem here. I need to connect the dots as to how it's gone from you to this. I need this explaining, otherwise there's a potential breach here. The other thing, I think Matt may have briefly touched on this as well. So there's a stock image website, Getty, which I'm sure everybody is very familiar with. So they've just started legal proceedings against an AI. I think it's Stability AI. They've just launched legal proceedings against the creators of Stability AI. The reason being is for exactly what I've been saying about the images. So this AI is an image generator, and it's been using stock imagery from Getty to create the images that the AI generator is creating, and Getty is saying it's a complete infringement of their copyright. Now, I'm hoping, and a lot of us in the legal world are hoping, that this case goes all the way to a hearing, because we would ideally like to have a judgment on this and get a bit of an idea, a bit more of a clarification from the judges as to where they see this area of law, how they're explaining and how they're interpreting it, and see where it all sort of lands. Unfortunately, the reality is commercial minds take over. Legal costs are very, very, very expensive in this arena, and potentially a out of court settlement will be reached. But you know, we will have to wait and see as that progresses. But we're hoping that's going to be the test case to sort of shine a bit of a light on this. But since image generating companies like Stability or DALL-E or Nightcaf, they rely on images and artistic styles created by humans. The issue of this is still very murky. It's uncharted territory, and it's not going anywhere. As I said before, the popularity of using these tools, not just to create random funny images, but more so for, we've seen it a lot with companies using them to create brands and logos. It's only going to increase more and more. And so copyright laws will be brought to the forefront of this conversation. We're hoping that there will be statutory reforms. There has been some comment about that more recently, which we're keeping a close eye on. But we suspect, given how slow Parliament and governments across the world can be in introducing new laws specifically around technology, because technology just runs so much faster than legislatures are able to. We suspect it will be case law driven, and so hence why we're hoping that Getty will go there. The other few things that are not necessarily legal mechanisms that freelancers can use to help protection would be things like, if you're publishing anything online, try and ensure that you're using digital watermarks to protect your content, particularly images. Embedding unique identifying information on your work can help prevent it from unauthorized use, and help you track where that unauthorized usage has taken place. So it usually drags with it various IP addresses to where that image has been. Now, we don't know at the moment if you've got a big sign that says, watermark, or a big watermark in big writing over an image. We don't yet know how the AI reacts to that. If they've got this big lot of writing over an image, it is very possible that just putting a physical watermark on digital image could be a temporary measure. There's a very good chance that in the future AI will be able to recognize that there's a watermark on this image, remove it, and then check it out. But for the time being, it's something that we would recommend, and at the very least it stops other humans from right-click, copy, paste, and using it elsewhere, even if it doesn't prevent the machines from doing so in the very near future. But otherwise, all I would say is all of this really is going to be about just keeping yourself up to date with new technologies. The AI is going to be constantly evolving now, constantly getting better. Obviously, it's user fed, it's user learned, and there are 6-7 billion human beings on the planet, most of which have got access to a computer. That's a lot of learning going on in a very short period of time. So it's just important to stay informed, updated, and how this can impact your intellectual property. It's going to almost certainly require a multifaceted approach to understand the risks and the opportunities that these new technologies can have for freelancers, and to take the appropriate measures to safeguard your IP rights. Sorry, that was quite long.
It was fantastic. Thank you, Alex, for mentioning this, and hopefully that also answered maybe some of the questions we had in the chat already. Charlie, I would like to ask you, because obviously proof content creates a lot of content that might be quite hard to protect. So could you maybe mention some practical steps or measures that you've put in place in order to protect the things you produce?
So the answer is very short. We haven't put anything in place. We do follow our own kind of our own brand name in kind of to track any mentions. So if we actually had an incident recently where we found that a company was pretending to be a copywriting agency, and they have like lots of different articles, and their About Us page, one of the sentences started with proof content as a copywriting agency that blah blah blah. So obviously the AI had taken that directly from our website. But I think also it's the same as kind of everything you do with SEO. Like if any duplicate content comes with your pages, you'll be able to see who's put it up there, and you'll know they've copied it because it's your content. So I guess if you work for clients, that's probably up to their SEO teams to check. And I also think that owners can't really be on you to keep track of everything you've ever written. Like especially blogs, they have a time limit generally, so it's not the end of the world if someone copies that stuff. You just got to keep making it better and better.
That's the attitude. I love that. Matt, is there anything you'd like to add from the freelancers community perspective?
I think one thing that I'm noticing, both from the perspective of a founder, and I'm assuming a lot of freelancers are experiencing the same thing, is the number of tools we're using day to day are starting to integrate AI. So we use Slack, Notion, Asana, Teams, Intercom, live chat. Three at least of that list I've mentioned have already released updates utilizing AI. So it's starting to become like a really ingrained, integrated part of our day-to-day business lives, for better or for worse. So I think I could compare it to Photoshop for photographers. If you can fully understand how to harness it and use it, well, then it can start to work for you, rather than be scared that it's going to take your job. You know, there's it's a very rapid process that we're seeing in front of our eyes. You know, we are really quickly have moved from ChatGPT in November providing access to most. There was a beta beforehand, but to most, that would be the first time that they've seen it. They probably shared it with their friends and family over Christmas. Everyone freaked out the first time you've used it. And even the UX and the UI process of it was really amazing. It looks like it's thinking when it's flashing. These are all very intentional steps to wow you and make you feel like you're a part of the future. To now we're seeing it fully integrated. We have a social media scheduler that has integrated AI, where now it's saying, you know, do you want us to write the posts for you? So what I'm seeing, and I think something that freelancers need to be somewhat mindful of, is when are we hitting a point when that type of content becomes very recognizable, and real writing, image creation, and creativity gets even more valued because you're comparing it to what will become the norm from an AI perspective. So, you know, a writer with a great tone of voice, someone who's funny or really captures the tone of voice of a particular brand, I think it's going to stand out even more over the coming months until this kind of settles down and we fully see how we can harness it.
Wonderful, thank you. So what I'm hearing is that actually AI is kind of pushing us to be even better and focus on the work we do best. And that is very motivational to hear, because some people, or even the theme of today's conversation, is whether AI will kind of take away our jobs. And so far I'm hearing very positive tone. So thank you for that. We talk about the pros and cons. So my question to you would be, if you were to kind of pin down a few key limitations of AI that freelancers should be aware of. Maybe Matt, if you want to start.
Yeah, I think we've probably touched on a lot of them throughout the talk. Certainly the factual inaccuracies is something we need to be really conscious of. I don't think it can write, well, it can't really write on trends and news and up-to-date goings on, and perhaps Charlie is in a much better position than I am to talk about that, but it has plenty of limitations in that regards. I think if we take a look at social media, for example, and we see the rise of TikTok, even over Instagram, authenticity seems to be the key word that keeps coming out. You know, people want to see authentic content. We're involved and engaged in that world a lot more than we are this kind of filtered version of what Instagram represents. And I think that's probably quite a decent juxtaposition to the way we're utilizing AI. You know, it's going hopefully to encourage more authenticity, more creativity, and to help us push it out. The quote I heard was, AI won't replace all freelancers. It'll replace freelancers who aren't using AI. And I think that's probably my big takeaway from researching everything for today and anecdotally the past couple of years of using it. You know, it's a tool, and for the short, medium term, it's a tool that if we harness correctly, will add value to our lives personally and professionally.
Great, thank you. Charlie, what would you say are the key limitations for freelancers?
So I think there are 3 limitations to AI. So the first one, again, to reiterate, is the research. Do not send anything out without fact checking it, because some terrible things can happen. Even the most innocuous things look like they'll be fine, and they're not. The second one is it cannot talk about anything to do with the future or this year, for example. So if you ask it, what are the top marketing events this year, GPT-3 has no idea, because it's only fed on historic content. So when GPT-4 comes out, which is looking like it might be quite soon, I guess it will maybe have more up-to-date information, but it can't say anything about the future, which is really interesting in itself. And then the third thing I think is there's such a lack of emotion in what it produces. So I'm really specifically talking about imagery. When I've looked at, we played around loads with DALL-E, and it just does not hit the same as like a beautiful piece that a designer has created or something. It's just not, it's not there, and I don't know would it ever be there. So the way that written AI works is by predicting what the next word will be. So again, there's just a kind of lack of emotion in it. I'm you know, we're only on iteration 3. I imagine we'll get to iteration 1,000,000 one day. So maybe it will by then. But I think, yeah, that there's such a long way to go. And as long as we are staying ahead and using it as well as we can for client work, I think that's, you know, that's the most important thing.
You mentioned the interesting point about the iterations. So if we just dare to look forward a little bit, we had a question from the audience from Anna's, who's asking, do you think AI has the potential to completely take over the content creation business in the coming years? You mentioned that right now, no, there's a lack of tone of voice and other disadvantages, but looking forward, is there a possibility that the AI will develop to a stage where it will completely take over or not?
I don't think I'm stupid enough to think I'm clever enough to know the answer to that. But I do think I don't think it will ever have a human experience. So I think there'll always be a place for human writers. And the way it works is not the same as a brain as much as the people who invented AI would like us to think. It does just predict what might come next. So it's not thinking. And I think that's a key differentiator. And I'm sure there's ways that we haven't thought of, but to me, I don't think it will ever take over completely.
Would any of the speakers like to?
Yeah, I agree with Charlie. I think, I mean, particularly in my area, so in law, working with clients, I think freelancers can understand the similarities we have with that relationship you have with your client. For example, yes, I can't see. I mean, we're still, it's AI's got a long way to go, but I just don't see how at the moment it's ever going to be able to replace that human connection and ever truly understanding, you know, what you know about the business that you're working with. You know, you may or may not know how that client is going to react to a certain piece of work or a certain piece of advice, and that might be completely different to a client, you know, client B, or be very different to client C. At the moment, AIs are not able to understand those business relationships that you've got and those business connections that you've got. It's just going to give you a pretty standard sort of black and white answer to whatever it is that you've put in there, and there's going to be no context around that at all. So although what it spits out might be correct, it might not be appropriate for the client that you're dealing with. And I think it's got quite a long way to go, if it can even get there, because that means it understands not just your intention, but your what your client wants and that business relationship. And how you feed that information into a machine is something I can't quite wrap my head around, but you know, 1,000 years ahead in the future, who knows?
One thing I'd say on a sort of counterpoint, and speaking for the on behalf of the chatbots, if I may, is it being on OpenAI, so ChatGPT, is a really big advantage, right? It's running as a beta at the moment. And what that does in terms of the market is it enables it to make mistakes. We're expecting it to make mistakes. It's in a learning mode. And that gives it scope to learn very quickly, fail, pick itself up, but not lose its market value. And typically, and more crucially, not lose an audience who are going to continue to use it, knowing it has flaws. A juggernaut like Google or Microsoft, they don't have the luxury of doing that. In many ways, Microsoft just reacted to ChatGPT and they fluffed their lines because they forced something through. They weren't ready, and they just wanted to put a flag in the sand to say we're here as well. So I think the nature of it and where its origins have come from is really interesting. That opens up a sandbox of ideas for it to be able to fail fast. So I do think we're going to see an evolution of it and how we use it quite quickly. And it'll be so fascinating to see where it ends up. But I, for one, want to embrace that and find an interest in it and take an interest in it and keep an eye on what it's doing. Because I think one inevitability is that it's here to stay. I don't think it's a fad. I think this is now going to be something we certainly see day to day in our freelancing lives. And I think the problem will be if you ignore it and think, well, it's just not something that's going to affect me. I think it's already affecting us.
100%. Thank you. So we're slowly coming to an end of our conversation. So for anyone who has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and also comments are hugely welcome, such as the one from Elle that AI is terrible at puns. So thank you. People are still ahead of the game. So yeah, please, any questions, drop them in the chat. Now is the time to get your answers. We had a question from Sarah during the talk, and Alex, you probably answered some of it, but it's fair to ask the question and see if you have anything else to add. So Sarah is asking, could you explain what the law is for Americans with AI generated content?
So yeah, AI generated content in America at the moment. America doesn't allow for computers to be able to, or computer generated content to be able to have any sort of intellectual property rights at all. So it can fall into two categories. The most popular one, or the one that most 90% is going to fall into, is that it's just got any generated content by an AI is just going to fall into the public domain straight away. So it means anything that it generates, it can be used by anybody. You can't claim ownership to it at all. Now that causes some problems for any freelancers in America, because if they're trying to use an AI to generate work at all, then what they've produced is potentially a piece of work that is owned publicly, and therefore they can't claim or assert any IP rights, and more importantly, they can't transfer any IP rights to their end client. So if anybody else was to try and use that, and the end client was to try and enforce any rights, so you're infringing on my, let's say it was a logo that had been created, or a graphical piece of work or art that had been produced, there is no rights that exist because it was produced by an AI and it's in the public domain. So that's the almost default position in America. The slight deviation from that, and it will depend on what information the AI was fed in order to produce the image or the video that it's come out with, and whether or not is it similar enough to be deemed what's called a derivative piece of work. So a derivative piece of work is where you've got, say, an artwork, and you take that artwork, you maybe modify it a little bit, or maybe you change the style of it. So you produce something that's different, but essentially heavily influenced or heavily taken from the original. I think a good example of a derivative would be Andy Warhol was quite a good example of derivatives, especially the soup cans. So you imagine the soup can design. We basically took that and put it into a sort of pop art for things. That would be an example of a derivative piece of work. So if you can find out what has fed that AI machine, because it's produced something that you think, hang on a second, that looks very similar to my art, or very similar to an image that I own the rights in. If you can find out if it's been fed that, and you can demonstrate and show there are loads of similarities here, then it could be deemed a derivative piece of work, and in which case you could prevent that person from doing other things with it by asserting your copyright rights within the original artwork. So yeah, the default really is going to be that it's publicly owned. So there's not really much you can do with it other than just enjoy it for yourself. But in terms of trying to use it commercially, you could find yourself in a whole host of problems.
Thank you so much, Alex. And we also have one question from our community, and that is most likely, to be directed at Charlie. The question is, do you use ChatGPT to create long-form copy? And if so, does it create everything with one command?
So I guess, yeah, there are probably two ways we use it with long form. So the first would just be to give an outline. If you it's sometimes really good at thinking outside of the box. So if you need to write 3,000 words to beat the other kind of content that Google's put high up in the rankings, then you sometimes get stuck around 2,000 words and you don't want to just write waffles. So it's quite helpful for that. So I guess that would just be one prompt that you need. And if it doesn't give you enough information, you can then say, give me 50 more reasons, and it will clutch at straws, but some of them will be useful. And then if you were going to create proper long form content with it, then I would give it different prompts for different paragraphs probably. So I guess the best way to use it would be to get it to outline the paragraphs for you, and then ask it the question for each paragraph, and then kind of go off that. We don't use it a huge amount because we tend to work with like B2B SaaS and finance and things like that. So it's just so hard to unpick the inaccuracies if they come in through that. But yeah, I would probably rather use something like Jasper or Coffeesmiths to use to write long form content, but it can be done. And also, I think being really good at prompting ChatGPT is going to be such a useful skill. So yeah, have a play around with it. I think that's just see what comes out and what you're happy with.
Thank you. That's actually a very interesting point, that it's actually also going to make us learn new skills, or like develop new skills, because we aren't taught how to use ChatGPT right now, but we're learning as we go. So do you think there are some kind of other skills that we need to kind of acquire, or that they will become high in demand as the AI develops?
I think AI prompt writer is going to be a big thing in the next few years.
Oh, wow.
If you think about a Google Assistant, most people who have a HomePod ask it what the weather is in the morning, or like set a timer for the spaghetti. That seems to be where most people stop. And I think it's similar for ChatGPT. I showed it to my dad, who's in his 70s, and to my niece, who's 11, and they both had really interesting experiences with it, but equally were astonished by asking it to write a poem, a love poem for her brother and someone he's got a crush on at school, just to embarrass him. So once we start to get past these kind of frivolous ways of using it, I think the next element is developing a skill and understanding around the prompts for certain aspects. But equally, I think that's when it spawns really exciting creative processes, particularly the image generation tools that we're seeing. How can we start to manipulate those into our own work, be it from a inspirational point of view or as part of it? And like anything, we're going to see beginners, skilled and expert level freelancers and other using AI and the tools that we're seeing at the moment.
100%. And it's good to mention that you can also have fun with AI. It's not just dancing. Okay, well, one more question, and thank you for asking, you, whoever's listening and joining us tonight. What do you think AI content is doing to our level of collective trust in what we read, etc.?
To be honest, there's a fair amount of rubbish being put out by human beings on the internet at the moment. The amount of disinformation that we see on social media, for example, I don't think has been. I think it's probably still at an all-time peak. We're seeing disinformation being used by humans already. The AI. This is where we went back to having to check what AI is producing, because AI isn't going to purposely put out incorrect information, but at the same time, its source of information is what human beings have put onto the internet. And if as humans we've put out disinformation, whether it be about politics or COVID or vaccinations or whatever it might be, the internet, the AIs at the moment are not able to work out whether that's factually correct or factually incorrect. It just sees it as information that is relevant to the question that you've asked it, and will then produce an answer for you. So I think right now, I don't think that we need to be concerned about the trusting of what AI is producing. It's more about trusting that the people who are requesting these answers from AI, that they're doing their due diligence and checking the answers before they just throw it out online, which unfortunately at the moment, there will absolutely be people who will be asking AI to come up with some silly answers and just put it out there because it fits whatever agenda they're trying to force out. But I don't think that's necessarily a unique AI issue. I think that's an issue that us as a species has got to deal with at the moment.
For anyone who
I
wants
actually hope.
Sorry,
Matt, you go. No, you go.
I was just going to say there's a really great podcast by The Guardian. It's called In Focus, and it's about 2 episodes back. They've done a piece on this, and they deep dive into that idea of fake news and its relationship with AI. Sorry, Charlie. No,
I hope that this will open a discourse where we all become a bit more aware about disinformation, because there are so many nutritionists online that are giving out all this information, and there are the celery juice in the morning trend comes from a guy who learned it from a ghost, that's how we can be healthy, for example. And so many people just get their news based on headlines they've seen on social media that are clickbait and completely wrong. So I'm actually hoping that because we kind of have a common enemy with AI, maybe we'll be a bit more open to fact checking and thinking about what we read.
Wonderful. Yeah. Great takeaway, not just for our professional practice, but also for life as well. So thank you for mentioning it. All right, we're slowly coming to an end. Matt has just shared the article to the chat, so thank you so much. And I'm going to share one link with you, with our lovely audience as well, which shows where we have other meetups. So before I ask you one final question to the 3 of our lovely speakers, and thank you for joining us, I'd like to invite you, everyone who's listening tonight, to join us for next meetups. We try to bring a different combination of information and interaction, and that also applies to today. We don't want to stop the conversation going. So if you're here tonight with us in the Zoom room, you've already signed up for the event online on this link at freelancerclub.net/meetups, and there's a chat dedicated to this conversation as well. So feel free to share your observations, your experience, or even ask questions in this chat, so you can make the most out of having the speakers here in the room tonight and making connections to them. So go ahead, check out the website and join the chat. And to wrap up, I'd like to ask you one last question, which is, what would your one piece of advice be to a freelancer who is now kind of unaware what to do with this whole AI transition? What would you say to this freelancer, to this friend of yours who's asking you for advice? Alex, if you'd like to start first.
Yeah, of course. I think it's probably something I mentioned earlier, and I think the key for not just freelancers, but for anyone really looking into AI and how it may or may not affect them, whether it be professionally or personally, is just to keep updated with the news and the technology as it's progressing. AI is going to be constantly evolving, and it's probably never going to stop evolving. And so it's just important to make sure that you keep informed and up to date on the latest developments within AI, not just about how it can impact you in terms of intellectual property or legally, but how it can affect your business, or on the flip side, how has it changed in a way that you can now take advantage of it, and how can you use it in a positive way to help make your business prosper more. So that would be my key takeaway, is just to keep on top of this, keep updated with it. Because I think as Matt said earlier, if you don't embrace this, then you will be left behind by this. This is not going to go away. So it's something that everyone is going to have to get on board with, whether you like it or not, I'm afraid.
100%. Thank you. Charlie, your one piece of advice.
I think just have fun with it and play around with it. It's a really cool tool. There's lots of things you can do with it, especially GPT. And I think, that's the way the world is moving. So I think if you just see it as something interesting and fun, every time we kind of open up to hiring someone new, we get a lot of freelancers say that they want to come back in-house because they feel that they're not kind of developing, because there's no one to give them feedback. So I think if you can see opportunities like this as a way to grow and develop and learn a new skill, you're not then kind of doing the same job all the time. So actually, it's such a brilliant opportunity to do something interesting and new and be ahead of everybody else. And yeah, I guess look at how other people are using it. But the main thing is just to start, like, don't worry about asking experts how they use it. Just go on and see what it does and see how it can help you.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Matt?
Well, two brilliant answers. You've taken both of my ideas. I spoke to a guy about 6 or 7 years ago who was the founder of a calendar scheduling tool. So if you've used Calendly, which is brilliant, he developed something very similar, possibly before Calendly. And he gave a talk where he said, in the future, individuals will attend interviews, and I think we can relate that to freelancers having meetings with clients, where they're going to bring with them an army of tools or bots that they're really proficient in, that they know how to control and work with. So you're not hiring the individual, you're hiring the individual and their army of bots that can help with admin, they can do project management, they can design, they can take photos. And that is what you're taking on board. And I see AI as the next iteration in that idea, that, you know, we all have skills that we bring to the table. Often we don't vocalize those skills clearly enough, in my opinion, to properly sell ourselves to potential clients. But now we can go in saying, well, you know what, I'm an expert at image generation. I can bring that to your company, and I'm going to be able to add that to my scale of creativity and imagination and comprehension of a brief. So for me, this is an exciting frontier, and echoing what the others have said, really leaning into it, having fun with it. Most of our members are really creative, so we have the edge. You know, it's the imagination and creativity is going to harness this technology, and those who do it best, I think, will get out in front.
Wow, amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your piece of advice and sharing all your insights and knowledge for tonight. We have some wonderful words coming from the chat, from Sarah, from Anas, from Elle, everybody thanking you mostly. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Alex Wellham from Briefa. Thank you, Charlie Hunt from Proof Content. And thank you, Matt Toling from the Freelancer Club.
Cheers, guys. Thank you very much.
Good night.
Have a good night. Bye.
Bye now. Bye.